Zaki Hassan is your host on this most epic journey through pop culture's past. Hold on to your butts. This is Nostalgia Theater.
Brought to you by the Movie Film Podcast.
No, I won't be afraid. Oh, I won't be afraid. Just as long as you stand by me. So darling, stand by.
Hi everybody, welcome back. This is Nostalgia Theater. My name is Zaki Hassan, and as you are listening to this, it is the 30th anniversary of Stand By Me. You can tell by the music that you heard as we were segueing into the Stand By Me, which is, of course, the film directed by Rob Reiner based on the Stephen King short story. One of the most influential films of that decade, I think. And so I wanted to take an opportunity to look back fondly at that film and what spun out of that film and have whatever conversations we can have about Stand By Me. And I wanted to have that conversation with my friend Zahra Noorbakhsh. Zahra is a feminist satirist, Iranian-American comedian. She's an actor. She's also a Corey Feldman fan, which is what has brought her to my doorstep here at Nostalgia Theater. Welcome, Zahra.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So, Stand By Me, are you a fan of the film?
I am. It's hard to say, like, fan of the film. I feel like it's a classic. Like, you know, you're not a fan or not a fan. You're just, like, moved.
You either like Stand By Me or you're a bad person.
Well, yeah, basically.
That's pretty much the way. It's math. It's just basic math.
I mean, if it doesn't resonate, it's like, you know, sociopath scale.
Yeah, you know, I mean, it's you're either with it or you're against it, and if you're against it, you are a bad person.
You know, actually, I rewatched it because I was wondering, would it still resonate the same way that it did with me when I was young and watched it? Mm-hmm. And that's true admittance. There were some parts where I was like, oh, it's getting kind of corny.
Mm-hmm. Oh, so in other words, it didn't play the same way as it did many decades ago.
Or at least I became suddenly very self-conscious of it feeling a little bit corny.
Sure. Well, and I mean, for I'm assuming people who are listening to this already have a sense of what it is. But I mean, this is a coming-of-age story based on a short story called The Body by Stephen King, and it's very different from the rest of Stephen King's output. Certainly at that time, because of course, I mean, he wrote Shawshank Redemption, which we now know. But I mean, at the time, he was like horror guy. And so here's this very sweet sort of fable about a young Stephen King-esque character who's played by Will Wheaton, who grows up to be Richard Dreyfuss. And, you know, it's kind of the one of the formative things that happened in his life.
I was 12 going on 13 the first time I saw a dead human being. It happened in the summer of 1959, a long time ago. But only if you measure in terms of years. I was living in a small town in Oregon called Castle Rock. There were only 1,281 people, but to me, it was the whole world.
Hey, it's the boss man, Bob Cormier here. It's a beautiful Friday morning.
You know, it's obviously, the film is about life in 1959, but I think the beauty of it is that you don't have to have been around in 1959 to find so much of what the story's about resonant. Even if it does, Zahra, like you said, even if it does feel a little bit corny at times, I think it's almost like the corniness is appropriate for a movie like this.
Yeah, you know, I think it is a question of age, right? Like I guess corny is probably the wrong word. Am I backpedaling? I'm backpedaling.
You may be, and we're just 3 minutes in, so.
Oh, and I already feel, what's the word?
You're being judged right now.
I'm taking apart the cannons. I think I'm curious if part of the reason why it stands the test of time is because Stephen King is such a masterful fantasy writer. Mm-hmm. And so he is so accustomed to world building.
Sure.
And actually, I don't know how much of the book is infused in the film. And, you know, You're the expert there, right?
Well,
right?
That's actually, well, it's funny you say that, because I have not, I almost pride myself, and this is not something necessarily to pride yourself on, in not having read any Stephen King books at all.
Okay, keep listening, folks. Please don't turn this off. Zach,
I pride myself on having watched almost every Stephen King, also Steven Spielberg, but every Stephen King based film and TV series. So I've seen everything. It's actually not a point of pride. That's like a stupid thing to say, but it's just, I mean, it's a statement of fact in my life that I've never read the books. So I haven't benefited from his particular, verbosity and how he's able to be probably far more masterful via text than the films that are based on his works are. But I mean, the body, I mean, it's a novella, right? So it's by virtue of that, they had to expand out what was in that story and make it fit into, a 90-minute construction. So obviously there were things that had to be changed and added and whatnot. But
sure. It's wonderful talking with you, Zachy, because with your previous statement, we've lost an entire audience. So now nobody's listening anymore, and I feel really comfortable.
There we go. See that?
Saying whatever I want.
It's
so
just
thank
you
you.
And me. It's just you and me.
Yeah, I think he, in all the sort of like Stephen King stories, he does a lot of world building, even in Shawshank.
Yeah.
Which still sort of has like fantastical elements to it, but
very, I mean, fantastical in a. I mean, something like The Green Mile, which is more overtly fantasy.
Yeah, that's true.
I think Shawshank, it's not known for any fantasy. I mean, it's known for being heart-wrenching and heartwarming and, all of those lovely things. Yeah,
I probably took us down a Stephen King tangent.
It's a worthwhile tangent because, I mean, gosh, what a library of work that has allowed for some amazing films. Some not so great films, but some pretty darn good ones too.
Well, now the reason why I went down that road is because what felt like it, I was curious if it did still stand the test of time was, I think, the adolescent theme.
Sure.
Like, I remember when I was 14 watching it, like, there was not a dry eye at the sleepover.
Okay.
And now as an adult watching it, remembering how much it like grabbed me as a kid, I felt a little bit like, oh, Zahra?
Well, why? Why is that? Let's get into that a little bit.
Well, because I did not grow up as an abused 12-year-old boy,
sure,
with a pack of cigarettes in my right shoulder and a buzz cut.
Okay.
Like River Phoenix's character.
Yeah.
No one even asked me if I took the milk money that time. I just got a 3-day vacation.
Did you take it?
Yeah, I took it. You knew I took it. Teddy knew I took it. Everyone knew I took it. Even Vern knew it, I think. Maybe I was sorry and I tried to give it back.
You tried to give it back?
Maybe. Just maybe. And maybe I took it to old lady Simons and told her, and the money was all there. But I still got a 3-day vacation because it never showed up. And maybe the next week, old lady Simons had this brand new cigar on when she came to school.
Yeah, it was brown and had dots on it.
Yeah. So let's just say that I stole the milk money, but old lady Simon stole it back from me. Just suppose that I told the story. Me, Chris Chambers, kid brother to Eyeball Chambers. Do you think that anyone would have believed it?
Oh.
And do you think that that bitch would have dared tried something like that if it'd been one of those douchebags from up on the View if they had taken the money?
No way. Hell no.
But with me? Well, I'm sure she had her eye on that skirt for a long time. Anyway, she saw her chance and she took it. I was the stupid one for even trying to give it back. never thought a teacher. Oh, gives a fuck anyway. I just wish that I could go someplace where nobody knows me.
And so as a suburban kid in an affluent area whose most exciting thing was Blockbuster, felt a little silly.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I think that, it's sort of, I think there's this extra level of tragedy when you look at River Phoenix's character, because the whole story is told in the perspective of Richard Dreyfuss is looking back at this event, having, read about his friend passing away, who River Phoenix plays in the film. And then, and then, when we watch it now, we know, of course, that River Phoenix himself had a tragic ending. And, there's this extra, it's like a meta narrative almost.
It is so meta, because also I read about the reactions, to River Phoenix's passing, and also sort of like followed each of the characters, like where are they now?
Yeah.
And the way that they recall the making of this film very much echoes the way the characters in it and Richard Dreyfuss's character does now, like later grown up.
Right.
Like reading the article that, is it Mike Wheaton who plays the main character?
Will Wheaton, who, by the way, would go on to play Wesley Crusher on Star Trek The Next Generation, which is, I think, probably what he's more known for now.
Not by me.
Yeah. But by the audience of this show.
I will brush up on my Star Trek.
If you and I are going to be friends, you gotta get a little Star Trek in you.
I'm working on it. I am. And I read what he had written about sort of River Phoenix's passing and reflecting on it, and like that is how it carried the same kinds of emotion that Richard Dreyfuss was able to convey as the character grown up, and that really struck me.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, worth pointing out, I mean, the kids in this film, I mean, they've all, well, I mean, notwithstanding River Phoenix, who I'm fairly certain, had he survived, would still be making movies today, I think.
Oh, absolutely.
But, we have Will Wheaton as Gordy, River Phoenix as Chris, Jerry O'Connell as Vern, Corey Feldman, of course, as Teddy, but not to, I mean, we got Kiefer Sutherland, and John Cusack is there very briefly. But, I mean, Rob Reiner found this amazing cast.
Yeah, they had an incredible chemistry.
The chemistry, and there's a reality to it, and that's something that I really glommed onto rewatching it for this episode, is that, they don't, their performances aren't precious, it's not like Lindsay Lohan in The Parent Trap or something where, oh, look how smart these kids are, and they're so much smarter than the dumb adults. I mean, they're kids. They talk like kids. They act like kids. They have insights that are like a kid's insights.
True. Though feminist comedian that I am,
yes,
I cannot then jump in to say that is also because they're boys.
Okay, explain that to me.
Well, I think that there's a way that boys, especially young boys, are allowed, definitely more so way back then, not that long ago, than today. But
do you mean 30 years ago when the movie was made, or 1959 when it's set?
Wow, I cannot lie about my age anymore, can I?
I mean, which back then are we talking about in terms of differences in perception?
I don't do math well enough to be able to continue the lie, so.
Okay, fair enough.
Like when I was in the 90s, when I was in high school and I watched it, definitely growing up, all the way up until I would say Mean Girls came out. I don't think that girls had license to be, and still really don't have license to be, like, sort of nonchalant about their looks and kind of not care and not take themselves too seriously, which I think we even saw with the latest Ghostbusters flick that came out.
Sure, which is, considered a flop now.
Which is so unfortunate, because I think there is a way that, like, women have to still be pretty when they're joking around. They can't get ugly.
So, well, okay, do you think that... Well, I mean, there have been films like Stand By Me about girls.
They have tried. Like, Girl Interrupted, I would say, is the closest that I know of.
Well, there was a movie... Okay, see, I'm going to have to dig this up. It was with Rosie O'Donnell and... what's her name? Christina Ricci.
Oh, the I do know.
Now and Then, it's called.
Now and Then.
Now and Then, from 1995.
And everyone in that looks...
Demi Moore is in that. And it's kind of, I mean, it's similar. Oh, Melanie Griffith. It's like, this almost very similar. I mean, the storyline is different, but this idea of, like, these adults looking back at their childhood, but unlike Stand By Me, it's all girls.
I'm gonna have to go back and check it out.
Yeah, I've never seen it, so I have no idea if it's as heavy as Stand By Me.
Well, you know what it is, and this kind of course, ties back into why I love Corey Feldman. Mm-hmm. It's the ability as a young girl to connect with that character who, like, at the start of every film, he's the asshole kid, smart alecky kid, doesn't care about doing a good job, and nobody understands why until the midpoint.
Sure.
And then you're like, oh, he has all this depth to him, and he's like this totally other guy. And so, like, Corey Feldman always played that character, that typecast for me. Like, he was always the kid getting everybody in trouble.
Well, and do you think that, to some extent, that's why he didn't really find a career that stretched beyond the 80s at the same level?
It's tricky with child actors. I'm always careful.
But I mean, Will Wheaton is still doing stuff. He's not really at that same level either. But, like, Jerry O'Connell. Well, Jerry O'Connell became, like, handsomest man on earth.
Yes.
And he married Rebecca Romaine. So he wins. He won at life. So he's still doing stuff, and like we said, River Phoenix would conceivably still have been doing stuff. Corey Feldman, I mean, just to be clear, Corey Feldman is doing fine. You shed no tears for Corey Feldman. He's doing a voice, I believe, for the Ninja Turtles cartoon. I think he's Donatello, if I'm not mistaken, on the current Ninja Turtles cartoon.
That's true. I did hear that I read somewhere that he made accusations that him and the other Corey Haim, had been passed around as young boys in Hollywood.
Yeah, I read that too. And Elijah Wood also.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
And he's been in and out of rehab a lot.
Which is, I mean, that's kind of the same old story. It's the same sad song about so many former child actors.
Yeah. So then whenever it comes to, like, the legacy of their career and whether or not it went on, I can't not think about that.
In what sense?
In how it affected their livelihood.
I see. Like in other words, that assuming what he's saying about being abused as a kid, which we have no reason to dispute, that probably played some role in his career or lack thereof.
I would imagine it would for me.
I mean, it's such a fickle, crazy industry because we certainly see how this happens all the time. The child actors are coming up and they have about 5 years where they kind of burn white hot and then they just kind of burn out.
Right.
And there's plenty of stories before Corey Feldman. There's plenty of stories after. We're just talking about Lindsay Lohan. I mean, if you look at her now, she's like, how old is she? She looks like she's 72.
Yeah.
And why? Because of the weight of sort of the expectations of this career, the lifestyle.
Yeah, and I think children aren't really able to separate the reality from fantasy so great, which is part of what makes some of the best child actors, right?
Sure.
Is they're so immersed in it, like Drew Barrymore in E.T.
Sure. But I think, I mean, what it comes down to is you have to have somebody around you to reel you in.
Yeah.
Because at that moment, it's if you're, let's say you're 10, right, and you're the star of a film or TV show, well, it's like the world is revolving around you, and if you're not careful, especially at that age, it's going to get into your head a little bit about how awesome you are.
See, and this is like, as we're talking, it's giving me chills because this is the like parallel experience, all of these complex emotions of watching the film.
Okay, explain that.
Well, the film touches on on sexuality, on homosexuality, on masculinity, femininity, boys calling each other faggots and homosexuals and homos. And, I remember the heat of that time of being 12, 13, 14, 15, and hearing that amongst the boys, and seeing it, and then also as a young girl trying to navigate how to be cool, in their world. So I'm very curious for you, Zeki, where were you when you watched it?
Well, so the first time I watched Stand By Me was actually... when did I see it? The whole way through. I saw it, I saw bits and pieces of it in the 80s. I didn't see it the whole way through until probably the early 2000s, actually. And I watched it with my friend Sean Coyle, who used to co-host the Movie Film Podcast with me. And, I just fell in love with it. And I fell in love with it because there were just so many aspects of it that I was able to glom onto, and by then I was in my early 20s, so it's not, I didn't view it through the eyes of a child, but I think that the layers of how sort of innocence is lost, I think, which is what the story is really about. I think that spoke to me, and and there's this undercurrent of regret and when Gordy is just, he's like, why doesn't my father love me? It just breaks your heart, and I think about that now as a parent. I have 4 kids, and I always think about things like that in terms of how do I express my affection for my kids so that they don't ever feel what Gordy feels. Now, obviously, the situation that gives rise to that is very specific and tragic, and God forbid anything like that. But beyond even that, that's a real source of angst in my life, where I don't ever want any of my kids to feel like I love any of them less, because that'll do some real damage.
Yeah, when you have 4 boys. Is there, do your kids have a sense of competitiveness with each other as siblings?
Yeah, it's constant. It never stops. They're constantly, it's always, oh, he got this. How come I didn't? Oh, he got 2 of these. Where's, and it reaches a point where you're like, it just drives you nuts, because they're so close together that, my second one and my first one are always competing. My second and my third one are always competing. The fourth one is 2.5, so he's not there yet. But I've seen how this story ends, so I know that he's going to get there pretty soon, and it's the same old thing. And so it's a real thing where with it's you need to balance. This is what I found. You need to balance treating them all equally, but making each of them feel special as well.
How do you do that?
Hell if I know. I'm making this up as I go, and I say that all the time. I'm like, the problem with being a parent is that you truly don't know whether what you're doing will work until like 20 years later.
Do you have any of those Louis C.K. moments where you're like, oh, wow, that just sent my kid to therapy for 9 years?
That's my life. It's just a constant thing. I mean, I find myself turning into like a sitcom dad. A few weeks ago, this is what boys do, right? And it's, I'm cleaning up the house, and I find in the downstairs bathroom, there's just piss all over the toilet seat.
Oh, yuck.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry, graphic. And so I'm like, well, I know it wasn't me, and I know it wasn't my wife, and I know it wasn't the baby. So that means it's either moron number 1, moron number 2, or moron number 3. I'm like, you morons, get down here. Moron number 1, moron number 2, moron number 3. And then it's like, you have to be Columbo. And try to.
Are they that good of liars? Really, Columbo?
I mean, if they can they will lie about everything, And so, I mean, it's exhausting because of exactly that. There's a comedy routine, and unfortunately, the routine is by Bill Cosby, which sort of taints the whole thing. But I think what he said is actually very true. He said that if you just have one kid, you're not really a parent yet. Because if something breaks in your house, you know who did it.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, and that's certainly what I've found is that, when I just had one and, a book got torn, well, I know who to get mad at.
Do you have siblings?
I do. I have one older brother he's 5 years older than me.
Did you feel like there was a sense of the favorite or not favorite?
Well, it's kind of interesting because, my brother and I were, like I said, he's 5 years older than me. So certainly when we were kids, that difference was much more pronounced. Now it's, we're both old. But I'm very close with my brother, and we were talking about this over the weekend because we were traveling together to Chicago, and how, like, from his perspective, he thought I got all the breaks, and from my perspective, I thought he got all the breaks.
Ha!
Which I guess means my parents did it right.
Oh, interesting.
I guess, but I mean, that's kind of how it, like, I just assumed that my brother was sort of my folks' favorite, and he assumed the inverse of that.
Oh, everyone in my family knew that just don't do anything that Zahra does and you'll be fine. I was the oldest.
That's, well, there you go. So you were the, in life, you're either an example to follow or a warning to avoid. So I guess you were
I was both.
You were at different times. I will say though, I mean, I do remember watching the movie the first time, and definitely I couldn't help but reflect on my own relationship with my brother, and projecting onto what happens to Denny in the film, because that age difference is very similar. I think it's about 5 years between the two, and you see how much damage it does to Gordy, and I think back to myself at that age, and how much of who I am I got from my brother, and how much he shaped me. And the notion of having that taken away and what that would do. I mean, it's very easy to see why Gordy is such a broken person.
Is he the character that you connected with the most?
Yeah, well, I think in a lot of ways. I mean, number one, because he's shy, he's bookish, he obviously becomes a writer, and it was certainly easy for me to relate to that because I was not Chris, I can tell you that much. I mean the archetypes of each character. I mean Vern is just sort of, he's innocent.
Right.
He's like a newborn baby. What's his name? Corey Feldman, Teddy. He's the jerk, and that wasn't me. And then Chris is the leader. And he's one of these people he has this natural charisma that allows people to follow him. That certainly wasn't me. And so, I mean, definitely, me personally, yeah, Gordy was who I immediately imprinted on. And I would say that was my personality through high school.
The which?
Being
component?
The Gordy, being the Gordy.
The awkward sort of quietly creative kid.
Yeah, I think that was me. I mean, I think it took me probably the tail end of high school into college where I started not giving a shit about stuff.
You're telling me Zaki Hassan, the film professor with a fedora and blazer, felt quietly creative and awkward in high school? No.
Go figure, right? Shock of shocks. Definitely, like, I mean, I think back to who I was in high school, and, you know, I mean, that's like 20 years ago. I was a senior in high school. And, I mean, if I could go back in time and talk to him, I'd be like, hey, man, just, it's cool, whatever, you know? And I think, by the way, I don't think that's unique to my experience. I think that for most people, you're so tightly wound from like elementary school through high school. Why? Because like you were saying, you're so concerned about how you're perceived and you know, what will people say? And, you know, oh my gosh, don't call me gay, you know?
Right.
Like literally the worst thing that could have happened in high school in the 80s and 90s, and I have to assume in the 70s and 60s, is to be accused of being gay.
The component of sexual shame is so prevalent in the film.
Right.
That's it. That's just an observation.
Well, I think it's an important observation because, I mean, these kids, I mean, they're kids, right?
Well, and it's interesting because, like, as I even mention it, I don't even want to talk about mine. You know what I mean? Like, that's how close we hold it.
Yeah.
And so there's this catharsis in being able to watch it.
Wow. That's really interesting.
And see it play out.
Well, and I mean, I think in terms of that, is the notwithstanding how much, you know, how much time has passed since the era that the film is set, I mean, there is still a universality to it. So what is that? What is the thing that even now people can watch and still relate to about it? Even, I mean, like, our sexual mores have changed a lot. I mean, as you mentioned, I mean, societally, we're not at the same place in terms of sexuality as we were in the 50s or even the 80s.
No, thankfully.
Yeah, I mean things have changed very quickly. I mean, I tell my students that if you would have said to me even 5 years ago that gay marriage will be the law of the land, I would have been like, well, maybe later. I don't see it happening so soon.
Yeah, I mean, it's also hard to even make that claim still because the Orlando shooting is still so fresh.
Well, that's a good point, but I mean, even look at the reaction surrounding the Orlando shooting, because homophobia still exists the same way racism exists, right? But the way in which both of those concepts are dealt with in broader society is very, very different now than it was, 50 years ago, right? So there isn't this sense of like gay people have no right to live.
Yeah, amongst popular law, yeah, but in people's minds. I mean, I a sort of side anecdote to this, and part of the reason why I'm stuck here is, very recently in the Good Muslim, Bad Muslim podcast, I talked about being bisexual.
Okay.
And in the sort of aftermath of that episode, I've kind of been dealing with, I haven't talked to my parents or anyone in my family about that as I sit here in the guest room of my parents' house. And when I also went to look at, creating a comedy tour, this interesting thing happened. I have this joke about how, Chris Rock talks about Islam being the new black.
Sure.
And I have this joke about how I think Islam is more like the new gay. We have homophobia and Islamophobia. And back when Obama was running, everyone wanted to know, was he Muslim curious in college? Is he going to go Muslim again? How Muslim is he? Can you be born Muslim? Is it a choice? And a friend of mine after the show, after one show where I did that joke, was telling me, but it's still scarier to be homophobic. And to be homosexual, and I'm not a fan of equivalencies, of course, right? But
Right.
I sort of like, had that in my mind. And then when I went to go book the tour for my upcoming show on behalf of all Muslims, the organizations that were helping me with security were capable of doing that because of times where they had to take care of gay performers.
Okay, gotcha.
And that security and those organizations exist today in the present for those performers still. And I was just really, really, really struck by that. And so anyway, huge digression from the film, but kind of also at the heart of the film.
Right.
They're going to go seek this dead body, these 4 kids, right? These 4 young boys. And for each of them, it's this individual personal journey as much as it is, this actual journey.
Sure.
And I don't know, there's this way that I think part of the reason why it's so universal, this story, the film, is because this story is these parts of ourselves that are not accepted, that we don't want to see die. I don't know.
Well, and I mean, I think what it deals with is just the inherent awkwardness of adolescence and of trying to figure out who you are, right? And that's kind of, I mean, these kids are, they're 12, 13, etc. And I mean, really, your sense of identity is not cemented until you're in your 20s, maybe even into your 30s sometimes, I would say these days, certainly, we're pushing adulthood further and further ahead, so people are now acting in their 20s. The 20s are like an extension of teen years.
Can you imagine what it would be like to be a teenager now with, like, your parents putting everything up on YouTube?
Yeah, I mean, right, and there's, the sort of what's the word I'm looking for? The viewer culture, where everything is out there for public consumption. What does that do? Like, from the time you're a baby, you're potentially people are watching you grow up by the week.
Do you have rules about that in your house? Because I imagine, like, parenting 4 boys, there's got to be some hilarious, antics happening here.
Well, it's funny because, I mean, in terms of pictures, we don't not share on social media, but we try to keep it to a relative minimum. So, as a general rule, I'm not a fan of just like, oh, here's, 50 pictures from, like, the outing today. You know what I mean?
What about videos, like funny, silly videos from them?
We usually don't share those to the public. We have them available for us and for family to watch, but not to the world, with the rare exceptions. But I mean, certainly, I feel a little bit uncomfortable about too much of my kids being available out there. And this is an entirely new realm of concern, because certainly this wasn't something that my parents and your parents had to think about, right? Because it's just the avenues weren't there to do that.
Oh, and we have to, I just learned this from my office mate. You and I have to put in our wills who has executorship over our digital identity.
Oh my gosh. Okay. That's
right?
Crazy.
Yeah.
Well, and to that point, I mean, look at what it's like to be a kid today, where you have every possible distraction, and Pokemon Go this and Minecraft that and everything else. And look at these kids in the 50s and the ways in which they kept themselves busy.
I was just thinking about that, about how they're keeping themselves entertained because they're so bored.
Yeah, but that's my question: is what's a healthier childhood?
Well, definitely one where you're running through the woods looking for dead bodies. I mean,
you're trying to avoid Kiefer Sutherland,
Yeah, absolutely. It seems so much healthier. Yeah.
but I mean, I think about being a kid in the 80s, and granted, we were not looking for bodies, but I almost look at that for me as like, it was pretty good because we found ways to keep ourselves busy.
Yeah, I mean, that's the other thing that was really, that connected with me really hard was how often kids are just amongst kids unsupervised, at all. They're like the high school boys that Kiefer Sutherland played, who, watching him, I thought he was 45 when I was a teenager watching Kiefer Sutherland.
Isn't that funny?
They look so much older. And then now when I watch it, I'm like, my God, he looks like a baby.
Yeah, because we've seen him as old geezer Jack Bauer.
Right.
And so it's much more jarring. But that's kind of another interesting thing is that, the sort of elasticity of what we perceive as old age.
Yeah, and the lack of collagen.
Right. But to that broader point, is what we see in Stand By Me the friendship that is drawn from this? Do you think that's in many ways a healthier friendship than the ones we see today, which are so driven by likes and shares and that kind of thing? Yeah,
of course, there's a part of me that wants to say, yeah, the ways of human to human connection are so important and get so lost. And then another part of me is also torn just because the ability to access a world outside of the one you live in, that there's so much more of that today. And that was so much a part of the reason why I immersed myself in so many movies as a kid.
Sure. When you look back at the friendships in your life, can you point to any that were as impactful to you as Chris and Vern and Teddy were for Gordy?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked me that because it reminds me of this awesome line in the movie that I'm going to paraphrase and butcher. But Richard Dreyfuss's character says something like, our closest friendships are those from when we were 12. That those are our closest and most intense friendships. And that was absolutely true for me.
Why is that?
There was so much at stake. It felt like there was so much at stake. I remember when I was 12, I had two friends that both were suicidal. And they were 12. And hearing that as a 12-year-old, I didn't know where to place that because everything felt dire all the time. And they were safe. They didn't actually harm themselves, but there were other ways that we all had horrible maladaptive coping.
Yeah.
And I think because you're 12 and you don't want to tell your parents about it, it just sort of, you do form these really intense relationships by virtue of the fact that you're separating from your folks and you're trying to create this really tight-knit peer community.
See, it's what's interesting to me is that, I grew up in Saudi Arabia. I spent 10 years of my life there. So right around the time I turned 12 to 13, we moved back to the States, and then I moved around from school to school for about a year. And so, I didn't really have a chance to form lasting friendships at sort of this key formative stage. My close friends now are people who I met in my late teens, early 20s.
Yeah, that's the same for me. I didn't grow up in Saudi Arabia, and I have so many questions. But I went to a different school for every year of elementary school.
Isn't that the worst?
Oh my God.
It messes you up as a kid. I firmly believe that.
But we learn to make friends very quickly, don't we?
We do, but I mean, I think that for me personally, I felt like I was having to hit the reset button on my life.
Yes.
Every 6 months.
Yeah, and that was the same pace for me. Why 6 months? What is that about?
I think at least for me, it was like every move was sort of timed with a new semester.
Oh,
right.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. The academic year.
The academic year, right? So, and it's funny because, again, as a grown-up, you look at it and you're like, well, I mean, it is what it is. You can't do anything about it. Like, I mean, if your parents get another job or whatever, guess what? You move. That's just how it is. But in the moment when your world is the four walls of this school, then it hits you a lot harder when you have to say goodbye. And back then, especially when saying goodbye meant really saying goodbye.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the same now where, just follow me on Instagram and, like my pictures every once in a while so I know you're still out there. It's not like that. It wasn't like that back then.
I still, find myself a little bit more detached than some people about moving.
Sure.
I don't know. Do you have this, where when I hear people say, oh, no, and so-and-so is moving, or you're moving, I'm like, right, sure.
Like when other people are moving?
Or when I'm moving and friends are like, oh, no, you're moving.
Well, I think for me, I mean, since I've been in the Bay Area, I've only moved within, about 20 miles, a 20-mile radius, so it's not like it's been anything drastic.
Have you had friends move? I mean, in the Bay Area, there's this mass migration.
I have had friends, I would say even close friends, move, but honestly, it hasn't hit me in the same way, and partially it's because, what I've found is that the older I get, the less invested I am in other people's lives. That sounds horrible as I'm saying. I don't mean it in a dismissive way, but I mean just in sort of a pragmatic way. You're so focused on just the day-to-day of running your own household that before you realize it, 6 months, a year goes by where you haven't seen such and such. And then you're like, oh, and they moved. Oh, okay. And it's so on the one hand, you're like, oh, it sucks that they moved. But then you're like, well, I mean, how often did I see them anyway?
Wow. I'm shocked.
I mean, it's.
No, I'm joking. I have the same experience.
I mean, just to give an example, right? Certainly in my life, one of my absolute closest friends, you know him, he's Brian Hall, who I co-host the movie film show with. And, he lives in SoCal. I live up here in the Bay Area. And I don't see him. I see him in person, maybe once or twice a year. The reason I started doing the podcast was because I wanted an excuse to talk to him. And I don't have the ability to make an excuse to talk to everybody I know. So what I found is, as a result, my circle of very close friends ends up, not by design or by desire, sort of shrinking.
Yep.
And, we see that reflected in the film, right? Where it's not like he had kept in touch with Chris.
No.
Right? It was like, oh, I was friends with him, and oh, I just found out he died. Like that, there's something to that, because that's what life is, right? People kind of enter the number of people who we carry on as lifelong friends is, it's less than 5, let's say.
It's true. Right? I mean, well, for me and you.
Well, I think for most people, like a life, and separate from family. I mean, a friend who you can say you've known from the time you were in grade school till, decades and decades later, a close friend. I think that the older we get, that list of people starts very gradually getting pruned. And again, it's not it's not like we're like, oh, I gotta, get rid of people on my Facebook friends list. I think it just happens. And I think it can't help but happen because we're not the same people at 12 as we are at 32 or 52 or whatever. I mean, when you think about it, when you're a kid, the thing that draws you to people is, hey, you and I are in the same class. Let's be friends.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The bar is very low.
Well, and also like, oh, you and I both get bullied by the same person. We should probably hang out.
Sure, but it's just an accident of geography that you know each other.
True.
Right? It's purely our entire lives are like a series of sliding doors. Think about your closest friends. What is the thing that brought you into each other's orbits? It's usually something entirely random.
It's hard for me to say. I don't have friends anymore. Let me think.
You have me, Zahra.
It's so chilling to think about the friendship component again, because I just keep thinking of that scene where we watch Chris, River Phoenix's character, vanish.
Yeah.
At the end.
Yeah.
Chris did get out. He enrolled in the college courses with me, and although it was hard, he gutted it out like he always did. He went on to college and eventually became a lawyer. Last week, he entered a fast food restaurant. Just ahead of him, two men got into an argument. One of them pulled a knife. Chris, who had always made the best piece, tried to break it up. He was stabbed in the throat. He died almost instantly.
And
it's very eerie.
Yeah, because Will Wheaton also wrote about how intense River Phoenix was.
Even at that age.
Right. And how it really struck him. And then you see it in the film, the way that Gordy is looking at Chris. Like, you see Will Wheaton looking at River Phoenix.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, I think that in that sense, I think that the characters are so well sketched out. I think that the relationship between Gordy and Chris is to some extent the relationship between Will and River.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, will you feel it?
Yeah, I mean, I think at that age, the reality can't help but come through.
Okay, so I always wanted to know the leech scene, the scene with the leeches.
Yeah.
Like, I always felt like the experience of having a penis was like this thing that just like bonded guys together. Every time I was in high school, like they would start talking about their dicks, and then that was it. Like, I didn't, whoever else was in the room, unless they were just like talking about the experience of being a 12-year-old discovering your dick. And then it just continued. Okay. Like Robert McKee?
I feel like I should.
Okay. So he's the like screenwriting guy who they made fun of in the film adaptation.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Gotcha.
So before it was cool, I took one of his screenwriting seminars. And there's this moment where it was like right out of a movie or a sitcom. All these guys are like talking with him and me. And like, we're all walking. They go into the men's room and just keep talking. And I'm just stuck outside.
Oh, interesting.
Because I can't go in and whip out my dick and start peeing with all of them and keep talking.
So it's the special, the secret key, the penis key.
Well, as a woman, I've never had the like experience of like simultaneously being able to have a professional conversation while peeing.
Oh, it's you. I mean, you haven't truly lived then.
I knew it.
That's the secret of life is being able to talk while peeing. Yeah, next to somebody.
And I don't sit around with my girlfriends being like, oh, when you're rubbing off and then like you blank, like, and then burp and then fart and then like high five. Like that doesn't happen. Unfortunately.
Well, I will say, I mean, the leech scene, I would assume that for guys watching, there's an added level of trauma that women do not have when they watch the leech scene.
Okay, this is what I need a picture painted of. Like, what happens for you?
Well, you sort of instinctively sort of like you wince a little bit and you kind of like you crouch, you cross your legs a little, because if you're a male, 1/3 of your like just instinct is around protecting your wang. It's like eat, drink, protect the wang. Right? Before breathing, you protect the wang. That's why when like I've been dealing with this. Like my kids recently figured out that if you kick the other dude in the crotch, it really hurts. They've found a great amount of joy in this, and it's a giant pain in my ass because we have to tell them stop doing that. You know?
Yeah, as a girl growing up, like it was always a phenomenon. I never experienced the other side of that. Yeah,
I mean, it's, like I remember reading about people who would get penis piercings.
Ooh.
And I'm like, you're violating your own programming here. Because you're supposed to protect it, not willingly impale it.
Yeah, I never understood that.
Yeah. So that's, I mean, the leech scene is that's, I mean, I think, and I was slightly older when I saw it, so I didn't have the same impact, but I would assume that especially kids who saw it at that age, oh my gosh, are you kidding me? That's like, you would have nightmares about that.
Well, and the other three boys had like this profound respect for him after.
Right.
Everything after that point was like, dude, Gordy had a leech on his balls.
He wins.
I feel like that should be a hashtag. Or like a meme or a GIF somewhere.
Gordy leech balls?
Gordy leech balls. Oh, man.
Hashtag.
When I was a kid, my mom told me the story that Gordy tells.
Okay.
About Lardass.
Oh, okay.
Because I walked in on my parents watching Stand By Me.
Okay.
And they paused the film because they were cracking up. But, of course, they didn't want me to see it, so they paused the film. And I said, what are you guys watching? You're laughing so hard. So then my dad said, well, your mom is just telling me the story about her brother, and it's making me crack up. And then, of course, my mom starts laughing more, and I'm like, what happened? And my dad goes, well, your mom's brother had this nickname.
Oh, how funny.
And he told me the whole story like it was about my uncle.
But so she just shamelessly plagiarized the Stand By Me story.
And as did I at parties for like 10 years.
Before you figured out, oh, wait.
Yeah.
I need to give credit here.
Oh, man, I felt like an ass.
Well, I mean, when we look at the film, I mean, I keep saying Steven Spielberg. Stephen King has said that of all the movies based on his works, he's most happy with Stand By Me.
Did he?
Yeah.
I'm fascinated by that.
Well, and he is notoriously critical of adaptations of his work. He did not like, for example, The Shining that Stanley Kubrick made, which is why they remade it as a TV miniseries, because he wasn't happy with the Jack Nicholson version. And I don't know how he feels about Shawshank or The Dead Zone, etc. But yeah, I think of all of his works, I think it's very interesting that Stand By Me is the one that he's most happy with.
I'm so curious about that. Oh, we both need to go back and read that book, huh?
I think so. We need to read the novella. I mean, I certainly think it preserves the essence of that era. And there's a naturalism to it that I think people it's very easy to pick up on. I mean, I think Rob Reiner, by the way, should mention, he did a tremendous job as a director. I mean, he's Rob Reiner, of course, Harry Met Sally, etc. And I mean, this was kind of, I mean, he was Meathead before this, right? Rob Reiner is from All in the Family, and I think we think of him now as respected director Rob Reiner. I think it was Stand By Me that really did that for him.
Oh, I didn't know the chronology of the films.
Yeah, well, I think Harry Met Sally came after, if I'm not mistaken. Harry Met Sally was like 88 or 89, yeah. So Stand By Me comes out, and that's what sort of cements Rob Reiner as a director of note, as opposed to, again, sitcom foil for Carol O'Connor. And I mean, when you look at, he did Princess Bride, of course, but that was after Stand By Me. I mean, he had quite a run actually, because he did Misery also. He
did Misery too?
Yeah. He did Misery, A Few Good Men, The American President, which I love. Story of Us, which I don't love. But, I mean, I think overall he's made some pretty darn good movies. It's kind of been on the downward slide, actually, or the last decade, I'd say. But I think the fact that he directed Spinal Tap, Stand By Me, The Princess Bride, Harry Met Sally, Misery, A Few Good Men, American President, I think that buys you a lot.
Wow. I hate to say it, but they don't make them like they used to.
Well, and I mean, he's finding that out because when you look at the stuff he's done since the 90s, I mean, again, The Story of Us I thought was terrible, and Alex and Emma, The Bucket List is like one of the worst things I've ever seen. So, I mean, I think it's a problem with any director is that eventually you start hitting that wall, and maybe Rob Reiner's there. I don't know, but certainly as a producer, I mean, Rob Reiner was the person who. His company, Castle Rock. His company is Castle Rock. They bought the original Good Will Hunting, like the original script of Good Will Hunting, and essentially the studio wanted to turn it into something that it wasn't. I'm sure you know the story that they basically with Good Will Hunting, the basically Castle Rock bought it and. It was Rob Reiner who actually told Matt Damon to tone down a lot of fantastic aspects of the script.
Oh.
So because he was trying to write it, right? So him and Affleck get together, and they came up with this idea that Will Hunting has like super intelligence, and the FBI is after him, and this whole like an action movie.
Right.
So.
This was the original script.
That was the original version, and then they take it to Castle Rock, and Rob Reiner read it, and he's like, "Get rid of all that shit. Focus on Will Hunting and his psychologist," and that's why it became the Good Will Hunting that we know.
I am making notes to my pilot and specs as we speak.
Yeah, send to Rob Reiner.
Oh, if only.
Get script notes from Rob Reiner. But as we wrap things up here, Stand By Me, one of the defining movies of the 1980s. What are some other last thoughts about this film that you wanted to put out there into the internet ether?
I think it's one that if you're gonna watch it with your kids, good luck.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'm not sure it's a movie you want to watch with your kids, even though it's about kids.
Yeah, it's definitely like one you want to watch with your peer group.
Yeah.
Whether your kids or your parents.
I agree completely. I think that if you want to watch an 80s kids going on an adventure movie, you watch The Goonies.
Yeah, and you watch it with your friends.
Right.
Well, no, Goonies you could definitely watch with your kids. That's true.
Goonies is and Goonies, by the way, also Corey Feldman. Which
I love that movie.
Yeah, we need to do a separate episode where we talk about the Goonies.
Definitely.
And yeah, I mean, well, you look at Corey Feldman. I mean, the Goonies, Lost Boys. He's in Gremlins, The Burbs, right? I mean,
The Burbs is one of my favorite. It is my favorite movie of all time.
Really?
Yes.
Well, I think we're gonna have to do a whole entire episode about The Burbs, where we pick your brain about why you love that movie.
Oh, easy.
I think that's gonna have to be a to be continued.
And then we'll write the musical.
The Burbs the musical. I think we need to make that happen. Yeah, let's contact Joe Dante and get that going.
So for you, what is especially as a kid with an older brother and father of 4 boys, your takeaway, Zachy?
Of Stand By Me? Mm-hmm. I think that watching it now as, I'm getting closer to 40 than I am to, 30. I think I view it with this pronounced awareness of how fleeting time is and how fleeting our relationships are, and how, sometimes a great friendship isn't about how long it lasts, but how meaningful it is while it lasts.
As time went on, we saw less and less of Teddy and Vern, until eventually they became just 2 more faces in the halls. It happens sometimes. Friends come in and out of your life like busboys in a restaurant. I heard that Vern got married out of high school, had 4 kids, and is now the forklift operator at the Arsenault lumberyard. Teddy tried several times to get into the Army, but his eyes and his ear kept him out. Last I'd heard, he'd spent some time in jail and was now doing odd jobs around Castle Rock.
Well said.
I think that's what Stand By Me is all about.
And that we have to hum it now.
Yeah.
One of us has to.
Well, I'm going to pipe the music in so that people can hear it while we're talking here. But as we wrap things up, you have the Good Muslim Bad Muslim podcast with Taz Ahmed.
I do, and we have an episode that comes out each month. You can find us at goodmuslimbadmuslim.com.
Awesome. And as far as this show goes, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, or things you'd like to hear in future episodes, send me an email, moviefilmpodcast@gmail.com. Also, hit up iTunes, Stitcher Radio, TuneIn Radio, Google Play, you name it, wherever you find podcasts, our show is there. But please leave a star rating, write a review, even if it's just one word saying yes. That's fine too, because we want quantity, not quality, is what I'm saying. So go against what you've been taught all your life for the purposes of writing a review of this show. You can also find my movie reviews at Huffington Post, as well as my website, Zackie'sCorner.com. That's ZAKIScorner.com. That's also my Twitter handle. I'm also on Instagram, so I'm all over the web. Being obnoxious, I'm assuming, but I'm there and available, so follow me there. And with that, on behalf of my guest, Zahra Noorbakhsh, my name is Zaki Hassan. This is Nostalgia Theater. Thanks, everybody, for listening.
I won't cry, no, I won't shed a tear, just as long as you stand by me. And darling, stand by me, oh, stand by me, oh, stand now, stand by me, stand by me.